Women are the epitome of strength, love, sacrifice, and courage. The role of women in today's world has changed significantly and for better. Women are now self sufficient, well aware, and financially independent. They have attained immense success in every field, whether it's sports, politics, or academics. The role of women has changed tremendously, and they have been able to create a positive impression in the society. The journey of liberation of women has crossed many milestones, and the society has indeed come a long way. Today's women are adorned with patience and perseverance, which has helped them to attain the pinnacle of success. Siddhi, Self Reliant India, Discussions and Dialogues for Humane Innovations. The forum of IIT Madras magnifies the thoughts and opinions of scientists and researchers, irrespective of their gender. We try to seek a gender balance in our webinars by inviting both genders to deliberate on the major issues facing mankind. Till date, 10 women speakers have enlightened the audience with their thoughts on various important development issues and solutions that can pave way for a self reliant India. Siddhi magnifies the voices of women beyond the disciplines across the globes. A woman who dreams of a food secure world.
Agriculture has to talk nutrition, not just production, productivity. Yes, that's important.
Women who cares for the health of all.
That you cannot have a good primary healthcare system without a good district health system. Unless we strengthen the sub-centers, we cannot increase access to ambulatory care.
A woman who visions for a sustainable world.
This is the opportunity to rethink the agrarian economies of India.
A woman who wishes that no one stays behind.
Our vision is for self-reliant users who have access to high-quality products made possible through a self-reliant assistive technology landscape in India.
A woman who works for the upliftment and the betterment of villages.
All are aware about Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, how it improved the living standards of villages. Almost 100% open defecation free villages are there in India now. We all can be proud of that one.
A woman who thinks about the waste and water crisis.
A lot of eco-friendly products are out there, so probably start switching.
Women who uses pen as a sword. Siddhi acknowledges the role of women in building a developed nation. Siddhi will continue to engage more and more women in their webinars and dialogues to seek their thoughts and ideas on how we can build a self-reliant and self-sufficient society.
So with that excellent video about Women's Day, we'll start today's Siddhi webinar. So today's Siddhi webinar is a commemoration of the 75-week-long program to commemorate our nation's 75th Independence Day. So 12th March 2021 at 6:30 p.m. IST, Professor Manik Kumar will give a talk on the Southern Revolt of 1806, a good 50 years before 1857. A few words about the Siddhi. Siddhi, Self-Reliant India, Discussions and Dialogues for Humane Innovations, is an initiative of the Office of Global Engagement, IIT Madras. See, the role of Siddhi, or the aim of Siddhi, is to create synergies for transforming India. Its aim is to provide a platform to discuss socially relevant technologies, bringing together various stakeholders like industry, academia, experts, policymakers, government officials, NGOs, social entrepreneurs, think tanks, and the general public. Now, today's talk will be moderated by Professor Jyotirmaya Tripathi, Professor and Head of Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Madras. He's a great scholar in the field of cultural studies, and he works on questions of identity and representation. He's published in some of the top journals in the world. And then I hand over the microphone to Professor Jyotirmaya Tripathi to introduce the speaker and the topic for the day. Thank you very much. Take over, Professor Tripathi.
Thank you, Professor Sudarshan, for this generous introduction. And as you rightly mentioned, this is a Siddhi lecture unlike any other. So this particular lecture is in celebration of 75 years of our nation's independence. And one of the ways to celebrate is to see the present evolving out of the past and perhaps changing the way we imagine ourselves in the present. So there are many chapters in our history that are neglected, if not exactly unknown. And revisiting those chapters is certainly a fruitful exercise. So to be specific, today's lecture is about the Vellore Revolt of 1806 that anticipated the Great Rebellion 1857 or First War of Independence or Sepoy Mutiny, call what you will, by over 50 years. So the speaker will offer a historical account of the context, the magnitude, and the course of the uprising leading to its final suppression. So now the question is, to what extent the rebellion was spontaneous and to what extent it was mediated by various other factors? Was there a clear anti-colonial national consciousness in the making of the revolt, or was it a local outburst? To what extent this contributed to similar mutinies elsewhere, such as the Paika Rebellion of 1817 in Odisha? How much of what we know so far is material and how much is narrativized or a product of analysis and interpretation? So these are important questions. Today's lecture offers a unique vantage point to engage with these questions, not exactly in responding to those questions. And to do that, we have a very, very distinguished scholar with us today, Professor K.A. Manikumar. He was former Vice Chancellor of Swami Vivekananda University, Sagar in Madhya Pradesh, has 37 years of teaching and 30 years of research experience to his credit at various college and university levels. He has held the position of Registrar of MS University, that is Manomanyan Sundarnar University, and officiated as Director of Distance and Continuing Education of the same university in 2009 to 2011. He has also been a liaison officer, SC/ST Cell, Dean of Student Affairs, Dean of Faculty of Arts, so comes with basically a wealth of experience. Under his supervision and guidance, 17 candidates have got their doctorates. He had the privilege of serving as the chairperson of Tamil Nadu Government School Education Textbook Writing Committee of History for class 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 standards, and co-chairperson for 9th and 12th standards. So Professor Manikumar has authored many books. The three most important are, one is published by the Orient Longman, A Colonial Economy in the Great Depression, 1929 to 1937. The second one is Vellore Revolt 1806, published by VIT University, and is going to be an expanded version is going to be shortly published by Orient Black Swan, the same text. And the third book is titled Murder in Mudukalatur, Caste and Electoral Politics in Tamil Nadu, which was published by Leftward. He has contributed articles in many anthologies and indexed journals like EPW, that is Economic and Political Weekly, Social Scientist, Review of Development and Change, Artha Vigyan, and magazines like Frontline, etc. He has also been a Fulbright Fellow at the University of New York University in 1997 and a visiting historian to Mauritius in 2002. He has made academic visits to various countries such as the UK, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Singapore, New Zealand, Bangladesh, Taiwan, UAE, among many others. So without much ado, I will actually invite Professor K.A. Manikumar for his talk. Sir, you may speak for about 35 to 40 minutes. That will be followed by Q&A, and I will be moderating those questions. So without much ado, over to you. The floor is yours, sir, or the virtual floor at least. Welcome, Professor Manikumar.
Thank you, Professor J. Tripathi, for all kind words said about me. Let me straight away, because of the time constraints, go into the subject. Before that, I would like to appreciate the efforts being taken by the Siddhi. Of course, I am very happy to be part of this program. And I am really thankful to you and your colleagues, particularly Professor Sudarshan and my friend, Professor Muralidharan, for inviting me to speak on this subject of national importance. Before I proceed, I would like to refer to a very important quote from Eric Hobsbawm. Hobsbawm said, resentment against foreign conquerors or invaders or any exploiters, for instance, recognizable by color, customs, complexion, and costumes should be considered anti-imperial. And based on this framework, I would like to, give my perspective on this important revolt in Vellore and its echoes in various British cantonments in southern India. Let me go one by one. Why armed rebellion of Indian officers and soldiers in Vellore Fort is not in mainstream narrative? This question has to be actually taken up because in the post-independence India, colonial perspective is understandable. In fact, the contemporary 19th century British officials turned historians and military historians held the view that it was part of a great conspiracy, or because of the military regulations, new military regulations and dress code introduced in 1806. But in the post-independence period, in fact, the British officials and military historians highlight that the murder of British commandants and the generals by the Indian armed forces and gave a very hyperbolic account of these details. They called it, Vellore massacre, but they did not highlight any of the other reasons paving the way for the outbreak of this rebellion. In the post-independence India, in fact, an awareness was created when the centenary celebrations of the Great Rebellion of 1857 were held. As part of this program, Professor S. Sen was commissioned to write the history of 1857 rebellion from the Indian perspective. Since then, there has been awareness, and of course, Sen did not highlight any of the episodic events involving iconic leaders in the southern regions, and particularly in Tamil Nadu, there was criticism, and the response was in the form of two important movies in the year 1959. One was Veerabandya Kattabomman, and the other one was on Marudu Brothers. The title of the movie was Sivagangai Cheemai. Of course, historians, particularly from Tamil Nadu, Srinivasacharya and K.K. Pillai also responded by highlighting this Vellore revolt. But K.K. Pillai considered that it was because of the ambition of Tipu sons and the intrigues of the dethroned Palayakaras and the descendants of the erstwhile rulers strengthened that particular ambition. And so the pretext was only the new regulations, military regulation and dress code. That was his conclusion. After this was in 1957, he actually, K.K. Pillai presented a paper in the Indian History Congress, and of course they are now available. And Srinivasachar also highlighted only based on the accounts given by the contemporary historians. He gave an account of the uprising, but he did not make any great effort to do analysis. And Professor Rajan, who happened to work on Marudhu Brothers, his book was published actually in 1971, but he completed his work 10 years earlier. And in that book, he highlighted only the Marudhu Brothers. With regard to Vellore revolt, he said, of course, it was a large last-ditch effort by the patriots, he used the word patriots, involved in the South Indian Rebellion of 1801 to overthrow the company rule. But Professor Rajan did not elaborate much on that. He did not even, pursue further research into this aspect. Of course, then Professor Chinnayan actually worked on this for his doctoral dissertation. His actually objective was very much limited. And so naturally, he only, gave a very descriptive account of this Vellore revolt. In personality-oriented history, the events which are not involving iconic leaders are happening under collective leadership. They highlight only the resistance or movements led by iconic leaders, but not any movement or resistance or upheaval, political upheaval under the collective leadership. And therefore, this subject continued to be neglected. And later on, recently, many attempted to do research, particularly, I should mention the name of James Hoover, and he made an elaborate research, but he could not sum up anything, out of this. He gave an elaborate account, but he could not come to any definite conclusion. So coming to the Vellore revolt, there were, troops like Her Majesty's 69th Battalion and 1st Battalion of 1st Regiment and 2nd Battalion of 23rd Regiment. The 1st Regiment, or particularly the 1st Native Infantry, which protested the introduction of new regulations and dress code, were drawn from 2nd Battalion of 4th Regiment. In fact, they were removed, and this 2nd Battalion of 23rd Regiment stepped in. The 1st Battalion of 1st Regiment comprised mostly those who served in the Tipu's army. As for the 2nd Battalion of 23rd Regiment, most of the Sepoys or soldiers were drawn from the disbanded armies of Southern Palayakarans. and a large chunk of agrarian caste groups, particularly, laboring groups, Palla, Paraya, and even Tevas comprised these groups, caste groups. And of course, there were landowning communities as well, Palija Naidu, and the Pillais, now known as Saiva Villalas from the South Tamil Nadu. They were prominently present in this art. And in fact, to a query to one Major Trotter, he replied that this regiment was raised in Sangrangoil, which is part of Tirunelveli. Now, the question of military regulations and the dress code, they provided the pretext. They provided the pretext for the resistance. In fact, the new dress code insisted on a hat. This hat had a very flat top. It had a leather cockade with the tassels. This leather was considered to be one of animal skin. It was rumored that it was out of, the skin of hog or pig or cow skin. And as it was one of the provocations in the 1857 rebellion, here also, this leather cockade proved to be a agent provocative. And moreover, the Muslim soldiers were expected to, shave their beard and have mustache only to the standard size. And of course, other regulations were the Sipahis and the Indian Sipahis and officers should not, be found with the caste marks or vibhuti on the parade. So this was used as a pretext, but there were other factors. But these factors will be discussed later. Now, what is this? The revolt in the Vellore fort. In fact, they fixed a date before the arrival of the 2nd Battalion of the 23rd Regiment. And then they had to postpone it because they had to be briefed. And then again, it was postponed because that day, the leaders, particularly Sheikh Adam, Subedar, and Jamedar Sheikh Kashim, were on duty. So they were planning to organize, this insurrection only during the days when they were off duty. So again postponed. And on 19th night, on Jamedar, he was later identified as Sheikh Hussain, were tottering around and, under the influence of alcohol, this drunkard, in his drunken mood, Jamedar, flabbered, and he, in the process, revealed the plan of revolt. So naturally, they had to launch the revolt that day itself. And therefore, early hours, 2 o'clock, in the early hours of 10th, that is in the morning, 2 o'clock, guns started booming. And of course, around 500 Sipahis and Indian officers stormed into European quarters and started shooting down. In fact, in order to, prevent the European officers escaping, they also set fire to the quarters. And their target was, mainly those responsible for the enforcement of these new regulations. It was a tactical blunder. Later I will point out this. And so they, of course, when shooting sound was heard, immediately the commandant of the fort, Colonel Fancourt, ventured out. He was advised not to go out, but he immediately, in his, night dress, went out and started ordering the fall in line. He wanted his soldiers to fall in line. And of course, he was shot down by a soldier. And of course, when his wife was watching, he was dying. And another important person was Makarras. Makarras was also instrumental in enforcing the discipline, and he was known for, for his high-handed behavior. And therefore, next target was Makarras. And the lieutenants who were on night duty, particularly on main guard, were targeted. And of course, Lieutenant Ely and Lieutenant Fuam were killed. And of course, one person was not inside the fort. That was Lieutenant Colonel Forbes. And he went to one of the hill forts and started, consolidating his position. And this adjutant, Coombs, he was actually targeted, but he managed to escape. And he also survived because, but anyhow, his house was set on fire. And thereafter, the fort completely came under the control of these Indian troops. And we are told, because of time constraint, I shortened this. They actually, after bringing the fort under control, they hoisted the Tipu standard, Tipu's flag. And there was celebration of a victory near the palace of Mysore. And of course, that was in the presence of Sheikh Adam. And Sheikh Adam was known for his leadership, and he completely controlled the entire infantry men. Particularly, we are told that around 1,600 Indians who were inside the fort. And there are varying figures, some say 1,700, but anyhow, they succeeded and they started, looting the belongings of the European officers and also looting the treasury. So because of this diversion, some historians are of the view that, they were interested only in looting and pillaging. They were not interested in anything else. And the soldiers also responded to the call of some officers, Indian officers, because they were interested. But any victorious army in the 18th century country used to do this. That is clearly illustrative of the fact that it they had completely brought the place under control. And since, Forbes was outside, he could manage to contact major courts, and major courts could send word to Gillespie. And Colonel Gillespie was in charge of 19th Dragoons, Majesty's 19th Dragoons. And they had earned a nickname of Terror of the East. And this person, Gillespie, throwing all civilizational norms to winds and violating all canons of warfare, entered the port, and the assistance of the survivors like Lieutenant Colonel Marriott. He was in charge of Tipu's family, and his brother Marriott, he was captain, and Corporal Fiercy, Captain McLachlan, Baby, Jenner, Cutcliffe, Adjutant, Ewing Sergeant Jones, and Assistant Sergeant Dean. As a matter of fact, Sergeant Jones, John Jones, and Assistant Sergeant John Dean sent a separate report to Commander-in-Chief after everything was over. And this Gillespie army succeeded in suppressing the revolt, because people say that on entry of these dragoons, all Indian soldiers surrendered. But in his letter, Gillespie himself wrote saying that there were heavy firings which lasted for more than half an hour, in which we had to lose many of our friends. The fact was, they fought, but unfortunately, the deplorable context of depletion of arms and ammunition in the arsenal of the fort made them vulnerable. So in the face of superior armed strength and weaponry of the British, they could not sustain the fight, and therefore, naturally, they started running hither and running helter-skelter. A number of Indians killed by Gillespie and his men were in the estimate of J. Blackstone, who was actually present, was an eyewitness to the happenings. He was the one who helped Gillespie to break the gate open. He was in the engineering service. 800 Indian soldiers were killed, and some of them, the remaining, as I told you, around 1,600 soldiers and officers were there. So 800 orders were killed inside the port, and then others escaped through the Sally Port, the emergency exit, through the emergency exit in the port. And later on, these people were, identified and brought back and put in jails. And immediately in the aftermath of the suppression of the revolt, of course, Gillespie himself appointed a court of inquiry. But in superstition of this court of inquiry, a special commission was ordered by the governor in council. And then, of course, the court-martial also had its own settings. Of course, this military court of inquiry also submitted findings later on. In the meantime, of course, when these two committees were in the process of investigation, there emerged a rift between the Commander-in-Chief and Governor Bentinck. The Commander-in-Chief, John F. Braddock, held the view that the military regulations and this dress code, did not do any harm. Instead, he attributed everything to the conspiracy of Tipu's sons and his supporters, whereas William Bentinck attributed it to the military regulations and the dress code. But anyhow, these two opinions were, debated and discussed in India as well as England. So public opinion was polarized both in India and England. And of course, before we take up the outcome of these commissions and outcome of the sittings of these commissions, we have to discuss the repercussions of this event in other areas, particularly for want of time. I would like to focus only on Walajabad, Hyderabad, Nandidurg, and Palayamkottai briefly. In Walajabad, actually, this happened around the time when there were disturbances in Hyderabad also. That was July 24th to 26th. Walajabad, Subedar Venkat Nayak was dismissed from service because he was considered responsible for the resistance of the infantrymen against the new military regulations. And in Hyderabad, in Walajabad, subsequently also, they held an inquiry, and one Munro, not Thomas Munro, Munro was put in charge. And this Munro gave a report that nothing, serious was noticed in this cantonment. In Hyderabad, right from the beginning, 1798, when the Nizam agreed to permit the subsidiary post, there had been discontent. And of course, in 1803, new Nizam took over, Sikandar Shah. But he was pro-British, and there was, so much of understanding between Nizam and the resident, British resident. The resident was Sydenham, and the commanding officer reported around this time, 25th, that serious disturbances were anticipated in subsidiary force. And of course, they identified the people responsible for this, and 4 persons were identified. And these 4 persons, of course, were later on taken to task. But finally, Montresor decided to withdraw the regulations and suspend the enforcement of the dress code. In spite of it, some 17 persons were dismissed from service. In Nandidurg, it was the handiwork of particularly fakirs, the mendicants of Islamic groups. religious groups. And these mendicants actually were inciting the soldiers, and of course one Mir Bakr and a few others were implicated in this conspiracy. Here there was one Kasturi, Subedar Kasturi, who was very helpful in identifying the culprits, and he identified 4 persons here also, and 3 Subedars and 1 Jamedar, and they were all banished for life to Penang, transported to Penang for life. In Palayangottai, interestingly, there were relatives of those who were killed in Vellore Fort. So since the relatives felt very aggrieved, they were planning to do something to, overthrow. See here, this to overthrow the company rule is very often pronounced. Not only they swore to, swore not to wear the new hat, but also they swore to overthrow the company rule. Secret meetings held in Sheikh Adams' house, the leader of this, rebellion. And in these meetings, they were administering oath. And this was very much disclosed later on by Sheikh Qasim himself. And there is a person by name Muhammad Jafar. He was a general, prominent general of Tipu, but he had joined as a cadet, as a Sipai in the first battalion of the 1st Regiment. And he was a very learned person. And he was, at the time of hoisting the flag, he was shouting with joy and telling those around him that it was not for the hat we were fighting. We are fighting only for this flag. He pointed out the flag, Tipu's flag. So clearly, in Palayangottai also, there were serious disturbances anticipated. And the commandant of the fort was James Wells. His book, Military Reminiscence, and 2 volumes are very important. This James Wells did a very peculiar thing, but it's reflective of the mind of the British. He actually wanted all the Muslim and Hindu Sipais and officers to fall in line. There were 150 Hindu Sipais and 450 Muslim officers and Sipais or soldiers. So he separated them, asked them to fall in line separately. He issued orders for disarming the Muslim troops. And the Muslim officers were arrested, put behind bars. The others, disarmed, were sent out of the fort. And in order to please, in order to confirm the loyalty of the Hindus, he also gave promotions. 5 Sipais were promoted to the rank of Subedar, 5 promoted to the rank of Jamedars, and 25 promoted as Havildars, and another 25 as corporals. So in this way, he was doing this, and there was calm, but this was seriously viewed by the company government. Because in spite of the findings of the commission, they were now convinced that it was not out of military regulations, because the suppression of revolt and subsequently given punishments did not deter the soldiers elsewhere. I mean, because we see this in Palayamkottai in November, Nandidurg in October. So even in October, November, September, the commissions gave recommendations, and many were executed. They were blown by gun. Of course, a person like Jamedar Sheikh Qasim, he was hanged, and his dead body in chains was on the display of the fort for public gas. So to that extent, severe, punishment, death punishment were given. You have details. In fact, I have no time to discuss here. In spite of all these, severe measures, nothing receded. The protest or resistance did not. Instead, it was spreading. So they were convinced that it was purely a political one. So when they were convinced that it was a political one, they decided to reconcile to the reality and strike compromise with the Indian soldiers and officers. So general pardon was given finally. 516 persons were admonished and taken back in the service. So this was the outcome of this situation. Now, I think I have come to a concluding part. While highlighting all these, historians have not taken into account the imperial policy of the British. Since the last decade of the 18th century. For example, Cornwallis reforms and the regulations which came to be enforced in 1796 only helped persons from the elite class in England to arrive and take up major posts. The higher posts were dominated by a new generation of British soldiers and officers. And the second one was, this judicial reform. And this judicial reform wanted the head of the village or the munsib to go to town on every other occasion to provide witnesses or to provide evidence. So she was fed up. And then the permanent settlement extended. But permanent settlement was in force in North Arcad, Salem and Chengalpattu districts. And here the settlement was, the village lands were converted to bittas, and they created a new class, not as zamindars. The payakaras were, in fact, on conditions made.
Professor Manikumar, Professor Manikumar, I'm sorry to really apologize for interrupting. So could you please wind up?
I'm winding up. I'm winding up.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. So this particular aspect of the failure of this permanent settlement system, as well as the failure of crops in the context of severe droughts in the years 1805 and 1806, and then the real threat of conversion, of course, was actually force in Tirunelveli region, particularly in Palayamkottai. Christian settlements had come up in great numbers. And between this 1803, the year 1803, as Breckenberg noted, some 5,000 odd people had taken to stand. Many settlements had come, like Modalur, Manyanapura, because they were not allowed to live within the premises, within the area of residential areas of other caste groups. And then finally, I would like to wind up by saying that Tipu's sons provided a rallying point, but they were declared innocent by this special commission. That is, so they were all finally shifted to Bengal, Calcutta, and where they had to live on reduced amount of pension. And then another important aspect is that the revolt, when we look through the registers of prisoners in different parts, it was not a mutiny of Mohammedans as it was held by several historians. It was a united fight of the Hindu and Muslim soldiery. And of course, they went by the dictum that, better we fight and lose rather than to have succumbed to such exploitative conditions. I think with that I complete. I look forward to questions and answers so that further details can be presented. Thank you once again for the organizers.
So this is actually a fascinating account of the revolt and the various motivations that guided the uprising. And also to be noted, at least that is what I could sense, is the way Hyderabad, Walajabad, Mysore, Vellore, how they actually are brought into conversation as the rebellion unfolded. And thank you, Professor Manikumar, for opening our eyes to these very interesting facets of the revolt and the details of its progression. We are really very pleased to have you, sir, with us. So now it is time for Q&A. I'm sure there will be a few queries, questions, so they're welcome. So you can post your questions either in the chat box or in the Q&A section. Maybe, sir, before others begin, I have a very innocent query, actually. Like we could clearly see, I could clearly sense the connections that were forged actually between Mysore or Srirangapatnam in particular, Walajabad, Hyderabad, and Vellore. But just would like to know, I mean, of course, I mean, we know that it basically predates the 1857 by 50 years or so. But going back to that question, like to what extent, sir, it was guided by quote unquote national consciousness?
Actually, we must look at it from this perspective. They combined feudal instincts and anti-alien consciousness. That's why, we have to be very careful in using the word nationalism. Though Hobsbawm used the word proto-nationalism, right. I think we have to use patriotism. Patriotism was very much evidence in history. In Indian history, we have seen these patriotic endeavors. And of course, that was one important aspect. Feudal instincts were there because, they dismiss it as feudal revolt, right? That is right. 1857, government had introduced so many reforms and so many things. But now 1806, they would have remembered only the exploitation, particularly it's very much evident in Mardubandyan's proclamation. His proclamation, which was issued in 1801 from Tiruchirappalli, was found on the walls and streets in Triplicane, in Chennai, as well as in Srirangam. If you go through that testament or the proclamation, you will clearly know what extent Mardubandyan's concern was about the exploitative and the colonial domination of course, the domination of the alien forces in different walks of life. So they combined these. Feudal instincts were there. They were all feudal elements. When they were threatened, they fought back. Fine. But we also see the anti-alien consciousness. That is why I use this framework of Eric Hobsbawm.
Sure, sir. Sure. Yeah, I take your point. Yeah. So, any other question, please? I'm waiting for a couple of more questions. We can still have a couple of questions at most. So in the chat box or Q&A box.
I don't think I have done justice in my presentation. Anyhow,
so can I ask you a direct question, because I don't have access to the Q&A box. So do you see any parallel between Bahadur Shah Zafar being the rallying point for Hindu and Muslim soldiers in 1857 and Tipu Sultan's family and Tipu Sultan himself being, because he was involved almost from the west of Tamil Nadu to Vellore, various places in Coimbatore, that entire belt, Tipu Sultan, Hyder Ali were actually in very close contact with the chieftains locally. And sometimes there was like contentious relationship, and against British they joined together. So what is your view on this very interesting dynamics between the Muslim rulers and the Hindu Sipais in that context?
Actually, situation was very explosive, especially after 1802. 1802, the Treaty of Amiens was signed with the French, and Pondicherry was returned to the French. As a result, the new French Captain General Deccan was very much interested in, challenging the British once again. And he was really in contact with all these regional forces. In fact, there was also a correspondence, and which they claimed they got hold of from Fateh Ali. Fateh Ali was the nephew of Tipu. And in fact, he was in contact with the Holkars who were at that time ruling from Indore as a dynasty. And Holkar's army was to invade, along with some of the disgruntled Palekaras, particularly Uramgonda, Sittur. They are not reconciled. Oh, they were, their resistance was broken. They were still not reconciled to the alien rule. So they were also conspiring. For example, Venkatagiri, the Palayam, Venkatagiri Zamindar was also implicated. So all of them were in contact with Fateh Ali. And these two sons, that's why, when Sudarshan said, what is the similarity between Bahadur Shah and here Tipu sons? Yeah, A.D. Cameron, he was the one who did a very exhaustive research on Vellumutti for his doctoral dissertation. Unfortunately, I don't know why I happened to look through the thesis in Edinburgh University, but right now it is available in PDF, archive.com. He said comparable with Bahadur Shah and Nana Pandits. Both are comparable to Tipu's two sons, Fateh Hyder and Moizuddin. Moizuddin was one of the hostages kept by the company government at the end of Anglo-Mysore War, particularly the Second Anglo-Mysore War. Third Mysore War. So they had realized, they knew, they had that spirit of vengeance. They were looking for opportunity to avenge the humiliating treatment meted to them. But still, Abdul Khalik was there. Abdul Khalik was seriously ill. That's why on reaching Bengal, Calcutta, he died. He was not, keeping good health. Whereas this Fateh Haidar, but Fateh Haidar refused to take over. When they invited him to take over, he said, "Fools, you think I will accept this responsibility with the 300 men?" No, because, this event happened before, suddenly they decided to launch it. Therefore, they were not informed. They were planning to get, join. They were to join. Those who revolted were to join some forces in Arcad, Balajabad, and also from places like Chittoor. But nothing happened because this sudden launching of this revolt.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you. So I have one last question, which was perhaps guided by your response to my question. There is a conceptual question actually from one of the participants, that how do you, your understanding of the difference between nationalism and patriotism? And we'll end with that. You could give a brief response.
Nationalism, actually, requires the existence of a nation state. And therefore, when people were calling 1857 rebellion War of Independence, they were, pointing out that India did not, exist as a nation. But they today think that mutiny, War of Independence are all loaded terms. But anyhow, Rajan wrote a book, the title of the South Indian Rebellion, the First War of Independence. So everybody claims that, particularly, who is the first person to protest? People in Tamil Nadu will say Pulithevar. People in, Andhra will say Chittoor Palayakara. And Valaya Raja, they would say in Kerala. Similarly, each one would claim. But we have to understand that, they represented a very feudal bent of mind. But at the same time, as a nation state, we have to celebrate, with that intention only. In the year 1957, Abul Kalam Azad, wanted this project to be conducted, project commissioning SNSN. So first War of Independence, I may not say this, but people are saying War of Independence, right? First War of Independence, probably. War of Independence in the sense, in those days, that way only I appreciate Hobsbawm's viewpoint that, we have to look into the domination, colonial domination and exploitation. See, this happened. Murshidabad treasury was completely looted. See, Robert Clive actually, returned with huge wealth, several pounds, of course. This exploitation, economic exploitation, one has to, understand that. And some historians, the process discussion highlight this, but still there is no, provincial account of exploitative nature of this colonial state. Whereas for the rest of the period, particularly for the second half of 19th century on, we have this discourse, and Dadabai, Nauroji and others highlight this aspect of exploitation, they call it drain of wealth.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you very much for engaging with the questions. We really are pleased to have you today here. Now I take this opportunity to invite our colleague, Dr. Karthik Raman, to deliver a vote of thanks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Manikumar. It was really wonderful to listen to you. I think it's a perspective that a lot of the youngsters will certainly not have, because not enough is being really taught in the history books and so on. So I think this was quite insightful, and thank you for the discussion, and thank you for agreeing to participate in this at very short notice. It was really nice, and we hope this will be a series of interesting talks all around the country to recall what so many of the freedom fighters, especially the less known ones, have contributed towards the cause of independence. Thank you very much, sir. And thanks also to Professor Tripathi for being a wonderful host and for handling this. Thank you, sir. And also thanks to the entire team at Office of Global Engagement at IIT Madras for really making this happen. I'd now like to hand it over to Ujjwala, who's been one of the stars behind running Siddhi. And also she has a lot of interesting announcements to make on the upcoming series of Siddhi webinars, which will really, set the stage going for Siddhi in terms of building new technologies and bridging the, the real goal of Siddhi in terms of self-reliance and socially relevant technology and so on. So over to you, Ujjwala.
Thank you, Professor Karthik. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an exciting collaboration that Siddhi is hosting between IIT Madras and African Asian Rural Development Organization. The goal of this 16-hour e-training program is to showcase selected technologies that are homegrown, that are developed at IIT Madras, with a special focus on technologies which are affordable in rural areas to increase the livelihoods of the farmers, large scale and the small scale, particularly in the context of Africa and Asia with pertaining food deficit, and also to improve the access to value chains and markets. The opportunities and challenges in the technology development and dissemination of selected technologies. Now, the audience for these 16-hour training program are going to be the middle and senior level executives from governments, particularly the policymakers from African and Asian member countries of ARDU. Thank you. So we have more programs coming up. Please keep watching our YouTube channel for more videos. Please follow us on Twitter and Insta and social media for more updates. Thank you all.